hand it over to Matt Pinto to take us through today's session.
Hey, thank you everybody for taking the time to join us here. Hopefully we run through a few things that will be insightful for you, and I'm going to dive right in. So before I go too much further, Victoria, Rob, my screen, does it look okay for everybody?
Yes.
All right, great. So Victoria already introduced all of us. Wanted to run through, so MPLS trends, things that are happening in the marketplace now that are fueling the kind of adoption of SD-Wan in the wide area networking space. And it's not to say that MPLS is losing market share rapidly to SD-Wan, but there is still a viable use case for MPLS in that space, and it is still reigning king in that space. But there are a lot of use cases that have been coming up that make SD-Wan a very viable option. Some of those things are like cloud-based servers and applications. So instead of connecting back to servers and applications that are at your corporate site or at a corporate data center, those responsibilities are being housed in the public internet. And with those being in the public internet, that internet connectivity is becoming more and more critical. So finding a way to leverage internet connections and get the most that you can out of those connections is part of what is driving the SD-Wan. And some of those benefits are the carrier flexibility on the underlay, the application control and visibility, and just how rapidly it can be deployed as opposed to MPLS deployments. We find that layering the service security features on top of SD-Wan is also something that's really coming into its own in this market. And again, it's not always a rip and replace. It a lot of times, and a lot of the business cases do involve some sort of an MPLS core or backbone along with your SD-Wan deployment. And what we're seeing is that the large enterprise customers currently are the ones that are not early adopters. They're behind in the migration from MPLS over to SD-Wan. So a little bit of additional insight there. So these are in billions. So $75.9 billion WAN market. What you'll see here is that SD-Wan's is got just a tiny sliver of that market. MPLS is still a very, very large player here. And the questions and answers on the survey on the right, basically what you're seeing over here is, if you take the no changes or invest more in MPLS, you're, looking at roughly like, 37% of the respondents are saying that, they're not making changes or they're going to invest more, which is a pretty significant number. We feel like probably a good portion of that even are contractual obligations that, keep them in the MPLS space for now. But along with that, you've got about 46%. So, the 27 and the 19 are either going to terminate some or all of their MPLS services within the next year. So that's a pretty significant volume of enterprise customers. So in that, the first step, to a successful MPLS to SD-Wan migration is going to be the planning phase. And in the planning phase, obviously one of the first steps is you're going to really want to figure out who your overlay provider is going to be. And by overlay, we mean there's a lot of different methodologies to deploy SD-Wan and SASE. But who are you going to select? Is it going to be like one of the more, tried and true? Is it going to be CPE to CPE? But who is going to be your SD-Wan kind of platform that you're going to put it on? The underlay, so some research needs to go into what internet connections are available at your site. Are you still going to maintain some sort of MPLS? Is there, are there wave circuits, point to points, like just making sure you clearly understand what's going to happen with your underlay. The applications and servers, are they going to continue to run in a corporate or a data center environment? Are those going to be transitioning into the cloud space? How are you going to transition locations? And then also users, what kind of user experience are you going for? Are the users going to be, work remote? Are they going to be in the office? Most businesses right now are looking at some sort of a hybrid workforce. And then security. So, how much, if any, the SASE, there's a lot of different layers to the security portion. And you're going to want to make sure that you're, with security, that's a big element. And then you'll rapidly go from there into the transition phase. So key considerations while you're transitioning, one is training. So there's a lot of additional insight and visibility that you get from SD-Wan and with SASE, and making sure that your network engineering team has training and is ready to step in and fill that role as you transition away from an MPLS and into an SD-Wan. Any of the applications that were identified in the planning phase, if they are going to be migrated, that's going to be part of the transition. The underlay installation, so the circuits that you have at your sites, getting those installed, getting them tested, making sure they're ready. Almost all of the rollouts that we've assisted with, there's some sort of a proof of concept after the initial batch of underlay circuits are installed. The SD-Wan overlay gets, put in on top of it, and then you get somewhat of an environment like is depicted in the Visio on the side, where you'll have some MPLS traffic, some SD-Wan traffic, and it's really, will rapidly deploy out of the proof of concept phase and into the hybrid installation where you have both MPLS and SD-Wan. And then once you've been able to verify and validate that the business is able to operate and that there's no lingering issues from a transition, then you just do the full cutover. And whatever that looks like, again, in a lot of cases, there is still going to be some portion of an MPLS network that remains for different reasons for each of the businesses that we work with. And some of them, the MPLS goes fully disconnected. So that is a journey that, we were very luckily a part of with SCA Pharmaceuticals. And with that, I wanted to turn it over to Rob and Matt and give you guys a chance to talk a little bit first about SCA and then a little bit about the journey.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And yeah, I actually, thanks. I guess I'll call you Pinto because we've got two Matts, but for Matt Collins, just want to thank you again for joining us. And we do want to transition to a real world discussion that gets away from the whiteboard into actual use cases and scenarios. It's typically very helpful. But Matt Collins, before we jump into that, I think a little bit, just a short background on who SCA Pharma is would be helpful. And then we can start to dive into the technical tidbits in the process.
Sure, yeah, we're a medical manufacturer. Essentially, we work between your big pharma, providing dose-based medications to hospitals. So a lot of what we do is sort of repackaging, but it's manufacturing. It's under DEA and FDA regulations, and a lot of the processes are hybrid manual to automation. We have a couple of manufacturing facilities, one in the Northeast in Connecticut and one in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Excellent. And I can recall, I want to say it was the summer in 2021, and we became connected and started talking, and you were interested in making this migration from MPLS to SD-Wan. Can you tell us just a little bit about what the actual genesis was? I mean, at that point, why was that decision made that it was time to start to explore?
Sure, yeah, we're a fairly rapidly growing company. I joined them in 2017, and we were moving from one manufacturing facility to another. And at that time, we implemented MPLS to tie our different facilities together to allow us to scale some of our applications that were really single site based, and also to extend things like our phone system. But when we started the conversation, we were looking for a transition for a little bit more scale, being able to be more resilient and really look for a capability to push our infrastructure more into the cloud, be more resilient with our connectivity to the internet, be able to take advantage of the maturity of the offerings out in the internet, whether it be our hosted environments or our shared hosted environments, or even software as a service applications for new growth within SCA.
Excellent. Yeah. And I recall, and correct me, but like your network topology at that point in time was very typical of, I would say, like the last generation network, where you had an MPLS core network that of course was being provided by a single provider. You had a data center, your firewalling was centralized within that data center, and you also had all of your voice calls would flow in and out of that data center. So the idea is like essentially removing that single point of failure, and ensuring that you have always available access and you're not reliant on that MPLS circuit to get you access to those core applications.
Yeah, I think early on when you look at MPLS, it's a great transition from a small to a mid-sized company, or if you're moving to multiple locations. But you do lose sight of the fact that you do only have that one main internet connection, that one fiber line through one provider. You have one firewall. You have sort of this holistic view of the infrastructure, but it's really sort of managed. So you have that whole internet presence connectivity, that's all managed by that one vendor. And so we did lose a little bit of visibility, but I think, sometimes that fits your organization if you're not prepared to sort of manage all of that as well.
Right. So Matt, I mean, just to kind of, I guess me and Rob will switch roles a little bit. He asked, and we went through like some of the technical stuff, but from the business side, like were there any special considerations from the business to make the transition?
Well, yeah, my IT organization is really pretty small, and for us to take full advantage of the offerings that are available with multiple data centers, AWS, being able to spin up servers, being able to adopt additional services, and to have real resiliency. With the one provider providing that network continuity between our sites, we really didn't have full redundancy. We had that one last mile, we had that one internet provider. And so in the transition for us to SD-Wan, that opened up an ability to do multiple internet connections from multiple vendors with multiple last mile per facility. That really gave us that comfort level that even though our core applications were in the cloud, that our manufacturing facilities were not going to be impacted by a single vendor network outage at one of the facilities. So business continuity was probably the biggest driver, the ability to just say, look, we know that that we're going to be up, even if we have cloud applications, even if we're running our business off of internet-based or cloud-based systems, we're going to be okay with these manufacturing facilities that rely on those services. So I mean, for me, that was a big driver. The additional benefits obviously were redundancy for each of the facilities and their access to services that are outside of their site. We're able to go to a cloud-based voice provider. We have much better firewalling. With MPLS, we had one managed firewall system. We had firewalls internally between our Wi-Fi and for our low-speed internet connectivity, but we didn't have real sophisticated firewalling. Now with SD-WAN, we've been able to also implement. We have that sort of egress point for our SD-WAN architecture. We have better VPN connectivity to the internal network. We have intersite firewalling and throttling of bandwidth, able to touch on quality of service, and also sort of limiting traffic. And now we have that within the site as well. And all of that was sort of facilitated by this transition both to SD-WAN and to a different internet connectivity profile.
Yeah. And really what you're describing is like the sort of the generation past SD-WAN and really into like SASE and like incorporating security. Was the intention always to just move down that path, or do you recall like what the thought process was as you were trying to, balance those two options?
Well, we had already pushed a significant number of servers and services out into the cloud, and so we really needed to lock down the resiliency of the connectivity to those services. We really needed to own that. So that was the primary driver. But everybody in IT now is really focused in on security. I mean, there are tremendous number of potential impacts, and so keeping your business continuity now is as much about security as it is about services. And so the ability to layer in additional security breakpoints, additional visibility, and that is another key point for us. MPLS, managed by a single vendor, really didn't give us a lot of granular visibility into traffic, types of traffic. And so even troubleshooting difficulties with applications, if they're cloud-based, we didn't really get a good chance to look at the metrics or the network traffic or the types of traffic, or even see anything that may not have been optimal for the business, right? So streaming of YouTubes or sort of non-business essential type functions. We didn't have great visibility to that, and now we do.
Yeah, excellent. So you determined that this was the right move for the business, and I think it's understandable why you came to that conclusion. One thing that we often see customers and companies struggle with is like how you weigh the operational risk of actually, making the migration, right? Because things need to keep working, and the business has to operate as if all of these things on the back end are not happening, but of course they are. Was that, how strongly was that weighed by when you were going through this, and did it have like, did those considerations like have a fingerprint or anything on the project itself?
Well, I absolutely. I mean, I think in one of our conversations you had asked, and hopefully I'm not jumping the gun on you, but what would I have done differently through the process? And it made me laugh because I would have gone faster. For us, we sort of hold all of the eggs in a basket. And for me, knowing that the responsibility of the network connections, the connectivity to the services, that's on my shoulders. And if there's a technical component to that, you have to be really, really careful about any kind of changes. So I feel like I was hesitant. I took Matt Pinto's approach, where we had a hybrid environment, and we staged application by application and functionality by functionality from MPLS into the SD-WAN. And in almost every instance, it was incredibly seamless, very easy, and probably could have been done much faster. And in retrospect, you really wish you had. I really wish I had gone and embraced it faster. But I think that caution for those of us that are in IT, it's going to be there. You're afraid, especially if you have legacy systems that that are continuing to work. They are the ones that tend to have issues when you change something. Especially if your documentation or your company's intellectual awareness of what was the reason or how are those set up or what do they rely on isn't fully documented in some kind of a configuration management database.
And now that you are migrated over, I mean, how is the new architecture serving the business?
Well, we certainly have reduced and almost eliminated, the main issues that we had with things under the MPLS. We did increase our bandwidth in the different facilities, but we've created redundancy. We haven't had any site-based outages related to any network connections going down. And we have lost fiber connections to different sites, but we have the redundancy there. I would say the user experience has improved dramatically, both from the folks that are working remotely, and we all know that with COVID, we had a lot of folks shifted from being remote more often than they are on site. And we did the same thing. I mean, we have a lot of manual manufacturing, but anybody that was considered overhead was sort of pushed out of the facilities, both for their safety, but also for the preservation of our workers, right? We didn't want to have a lot of interactions between people, especially if it wasn't necessary. So now our topology is, almost 50% of the people that were connecting to systems are now connecting through a VPN or remotely, and that was a easy transition for us because of the tools that we have and the fact that we were moving rapidly to a cloud-based services and servers and infrastructure.
Yeah, excellent. Matt, one thing that I do recall, and like feel free to not provide much detail or not any at all, but you did have like a security incident post implementation.
We did, yeah. We had an issue with security breach, and we were able to recover from that incredibly quickly, both because we were able to implement a lot more intersite security systems to compartmentalize and really mitigate any of the spread, and also because we were mostly in the cloud and we were really resilient, and we had great snapshots and backups and and capability to recover very quickly. So absolutely, if we had been in the full network topology prior to switching to SD-Wan, it would have been 2, 3, maybe 10x, recovery time. So it definitely paid incredible dividends to us in that instant as well.
Awesome. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, Matt, is voice. And MPLS, especially, like the traditional MPLS environment and the architecture you had, in many cases, those were engineered to support centralized call processing. And it was, an excellent solution to move calls from your sites to that call processor with very good predictable quality. Moving away, I should say, from MPLS to, you're with a major UCaaS provider now, and of course you've got the SD-WAN and SASE. Like, have you seen any call quality issues, call drop issues, or any kind of quality of service issues?
No, not yet. I mean, we were really cognizant of that, and I think there's a lot of documentation out there that sort of touts MPLS as a significant improvement or as a better tool for voice than SD-WAN. But I think any of the issues that we had were related to some of the things with Zoom architecture and Teams architecture, but it was really bandwidth related. It wasn't related to what it was that we were using, or any of the lack of quality of service. So, I think, knock on wood, I think we're going to continue to monitor it, continue to make sure that we're applying the right quality of system or quality of service metrics on those functions. But we're very happy with the transition, and that's another piece of the always up and sort of resiliency, right? So now we have that cloud platform that if one of our manufacturing facilities was offline for weather or power or any of those types of other issues that do happen occasionally, we still look as though we are a full-size real company with presence, and we can continue to work without concern.
So that's the kind of the user experience as it pertains to the VoIP process. What about like the remote users experience, like both the remote users that are the SCA folks that are working from home or hybrid working, but when they are remote, and also like your customers, the applications that your customers log on to place their orders and things of that nature, like what's that user experience been like?
I think it's been a seamless, continuous, non-interrupted process. I mean, moving all of our services out into cloud, especially our customer-facing services, has meant almost no downtime. And certainly for voice and for our customer facing, we've had zero downtime since the cyber event.
Right on.
Okay. And just from like a Lightyear perspective, Matt, I mean, from my perspective, the value that we brought to the table was helping like you cut through a lot of noise in a landscape that's got a lot of, many providers that are all sort of saying the same thing, and to get down to a much smaller list of relevant providers quickly. You had noted just about carrier availability and ensuring that you've got diversity on the last mile, both like ASN diversity and last mile diversity. Our software platform, of course, accommodates that, and then everything managed through our digital platform. Anything else that's notable just from a process perspective that you would say that we helped you with?
Well, I would say, the end-to-end management, right? So I have a small team. I have less than 10 people total in about a 600-person company. Our ability to take on, manage, and run a project of this scale, where we're dropping new internet connectivity from 2 different providers into 3 different geographically separated facilities, and then be able to manage that process and choose the right technology. The partnership that we had with Lightyear was phenomenal. I mean, this is your bread and butter. You guys know this business. You were able to talk us through the technology, find us the appropriate vendors, guide us away from danger zones and pitfalls, and we wouldn't have been successful without Lightyear. We'd still be in the midst of probably vendor qualifications right now, as opposed to being fully implemented for over a year.
Appreciate that, Matt. Thank you. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. Matt Pinto, would you like to start?
So I'll start with a couple of the questions that came in advance. So we gave attendees the option to ask questions as they were registering. So I would say if you're with us now and we're going through this, and you have any additional questions that have come up, if they're questions for Matt Collins or Lightyear, please take a second and post those questions into the Q&A chat. But so one of the questions that came in, which I thought was good. So David Hamilton from the VM group, he was asking about common use cases of SD-WAN. So our experience is not that it's not really vertical specific. We've seen adoption for SD-WAN in multiple verticals, retail, even at business or infrastructure critical, like first responders are starting to adopt the SD-WAN. I'd say if your organization has already started to make the transition from premise-based applications and servers to cloud-based applications and servers, then it's time to also take a hard look at SD-WAN, because a lot of the connectivity to those services are going to be via the internet. So what SD-WAN, and again, for the context of this conversation, we're really kind of encompassing SD-WAN and SASE a little bit interchangeably. There are some very quantifiable differentiators there, but yeah, I mean, taking the SD-WAN approach for cloud connected servers and applications, and that's an easy one to start the conversation. To Matt Collins's point about business continuity, and if downtime is, if you are the type of business that can quantify like a financial amount to your business downtime, then clearly having multiple connection options into your business that's something that you really need to consider. And SD-WAN makes that a very easy transition as well. So David, I hope that answered your question. If you have any follow-ups, please post it in the chat, and Victoria will she'll make sure that we see those. Another good question that came in from Josephine. I believe the pronunciation is going to be Merez from OSP Telecom Professionals. She was asking if there's going to be any opportunities for the expansion of telecommunication infrastructure as it pertains to fiber optic cable. And I would say a big resounding yes to that one. So in a lot of cases where we're, working with customers, one of the clear advantages for an SD-WAN type of a deployment is going to be that, diversity and redundancy to ultimately drive business continuity. So we'll run into customer locations that have only one fiber connection. And really there's a large appetite to get a second one from a secondary, internet service provider. So with regards to, do we see opportunity there? We see an overwhelming opportunity for additional fiber and bringing more fiber into buildings that are currently single threaded. So yes, I'd say a resounding yes. So while I was going through those, Rob, did any questions come in that you wanted to grab?
Yeah, there's a couple good ones. For a large corporation that's heavily invested in MPLS, it's not easy to transition to SD-WAN with just internet. Is deploying SD-WAN with a single internet connection plus an MPLS transport a good first step? And I would say it absolutely is. Ultimately, this is, again, it goes back to comfort level and risk tolerance. But many enterprises, especially large enterprises, they do tend to maintain the MPLS network and orchestrate traffic between that private network and the public internet. We're actually working with multiple customers right now that have had that sort of environment in production for a couple of years. And they have the confidence after leveraging that technology to now go back and augment the underlay network with a new diverse internet connection and actually wind down the VPLS or the MPLS circuit. So they maintain that MPLS network until they felt comfortable. And then, turning that down often results in significant cost savings. So that's something that we see very often, especially with large enterprises. Follow up to that was, if I have two internet connections with an aggregate bandwidth of 200 megabits per second, if the license for SD-WAN is only 100 megabits per second, do you recommend downgrading the internet pipes to 100 megabits per second combined? This is also an excellent question. I'm not sure I have a great answer, and Matt Pinto, you can chime in here as well. One of the complexities and annoyances that I personally have with SD-WAN in some cases is the licensing is very complicated, and there's utilization, there's aggregate throughput. Sometimes you have middle mile networks that are costed in different areas. So ultimately, my experience here is that it's going to depend on the specific SD-WAN platform, how you want to navigate that. But this typically is like licensing and throughput and capacity and how much you're subscribing to. It's something that is a significant part of the buying process that needs to be thought through. Matt Pinto, would you correct me there or potentially add anything?
I wouldn't correct any of that, but I would add to it that with very plainly, do I recommend downgrading? The very plainly would be no, I don't. If you need that additional bandwidth, if you're in fact utilizing that additional bandwidth, I'm not aware of any SD-WAN providers currently that will start discarding packets if you go above their license. A lot of them have, different usage metrics that they'll do for like peak usage and things in aggregate usage and things like that. But ultimately, this is not going to be across the board. There is really no across the board, right? It's provider by provider specific. But what I have seen is if you're consistently going over your licensed throughput, especially if it's like a SASE type of a network where you're hitting a core with actual prioritization on it, that you'll get a notification from the provider. But the thing is, if you're exceeding that bandwidth, then the next step that you should take before you just knee-jerk decide, well, let me go ahead and downgrade my license would be, take a minute. You get an awful lot of additional visibility into what that traffic is, like what is being sent out, what's coming back in. Take a second to see if maybe some of that can be offloaded directly to the internet as opposed to writing, MPLS links or SD-WAN links, and just, find out if there's a creative way, like, as an example, and I've seen some of this. If the large majority of that traffic is Netflix, then you can just go in on that specific application and throttle Netflix as an application and the amount of bandwidth that Netflix has usage or available, right? And that's, social media, that's another big one, streaming, audio, video, that sort of thing. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't start off with the knee-jerk recommendation of, yeah, just download your license. It's really a conversation that needs to take place at that point.
Yeah. Matt, Pinto, another one for you, just around like how you ensure quality of service over a non-controlled transport,
Sure.
the internet.
Sure. So there's a couple of different things that take place there now. So one of the things is, again, it's going to be that application visibility. So QoS, that's a specific MPLS type of packet prioritization, right? So on an internet circuit, nothing is looking for the DSCP value for that QoS to forward it or anything like that. And that was alphabet soup. I apologize for the non-techies, but yeah, that the replacement for that is having the visibility and having the ability to prioritize the applications, and then making sure on both ends of those SD-WAN transports that only the traffic that is supposed to be taking prioritization is actually getting it. So it's controlled on either end of, in essence, a very similar type of transport as like a VPN tunnel. So if you're controlling on either end of the VPN tunnel who gets prioritization to the tunnel, then in theory, whatever's on that, you should know about it because you let it in on both sides, right? So it's not an exact match for QoS, granted. However, it has really revolutionized and gotten to the point where the user experience is so similar to a standard QoS on MPLS that it's really not a huge design consideration in the way that SD-WAN is deployed currently.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, like there's the middle mile network, which a SD-WAN provider would route traffic over, that has lots of thought into peering and being able to access public applications, whether it's AWS or Azure or a UCaaS provider or something similar. Matt Collins, I wanted to just come back to you, and I don't think there's really any more questions, but one thing that I failed to ask that I think is important is just in terms of the cost impact. This is another thing about MPLS and SD-WAN, like what's it actually going to cost? And I think there's no blanket answer here, which is why it comes up all the time. But for SCA and for our specific project, was this was a cost savings, cost neutral? Was this something that had to come out of a new budget line item? If a little insight there would be really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Yeah, it was something that I meant to mention as part of our benefit. So we ended up as cost neutral through the transition, but it wasn't an apples to apples, right? So we went from a single 50 meg up and down circuit with one vendor, and we end up with multiple 100 meg fiber circuits up and down for each facility, and so just 4 times the bandwidth for each facility, multiple egress points. Whereas when we had the one managed firewall service, all of our traffic was consolidated from the facilities out through that one portal. So that bandwidth solves a lot of your user experience issues, and for us to be cost neutral with a huge upgrade in redundancy, resiliency, bandwidth, the user experience has just been through the roof. It's been fantastic.
Awesome. we're nearing time here. I don't think we have any further questions, but we'll maybe provide a few seconds if any last ones want to trickle in. But just want to thank everyone for joining, and especially want to thank Matt Collins for really candidly and transparently talking through his experience, and what this migration and transition did and accomplished for the business. So thank you for your time, Matt. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks everybody for attending.
Please hang up and try again.